This episode is sponsored by Agent CRM. If you're in sales and tired of paying 3, 4, or 5 different companies for your email, CRM, funnels, phone, follow-up automation, check out Agent CRM. It's an all-in-one tool that combines all that you need to reach out, nurture, and close your clients. They've got weekly support calls so you can get up and running in no time. Get a free 14-day trial by going to the link below in the show notes. Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Dan Wynn, and today I've got a very special guest. He is a bankruptcy attorney in Northern California with 3 offices in Walnut Creek, Antioch, and Hercules, California. So I want to welcome to the show, Mike Primus.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks for having me on today.
Sure. Hey, so the reason why I wanted to have you come on the show and discuss bankruptcy, because right now we're kind of in the middle of 2022. We're not quite out of the pandemic yet, but a lot of businesses have been hurting over the last 2 years due to closure of the doors and government restrictions. And fortunately, some of them have had to file for bankruptcy. But I want to bring you on the show so you can share your particular expertise about business bankruptcy and how perhaps businesses can arise like the phoenix out of the ashes and onto the next thing. But before we kind of get into the substance of the matter, can you share a little bit about yourself and how you got to practice bankruptcy law?
Sure. The truth isn't too flattering, Dan. I was in college in kind of my junior year, and I saw people that were graduating and they were getting jobs that weren't really very appealing, and they weren't what I thought I was going to be doing when I got out of college. And I said to myself, I'm about a semester or 2 away from being in their shoes. And so I did a little self-assessment about what I felt like I was good at, what I might be able to do. I applied to law school and I got into law school. Now, in terms of bankruptcy, the answer to that is equally humbling. I got a summer job working for a lawyer that did some bankruptcy and some other things, and I was pie-eyed and raring to go, and I was taking papers all over and asking him about things, and he told me, "Don't worry about that, I'll handle it." But eventually, he gave me a little exposure to it, and I had an internship with the governmental entity that oversees the bankruptcy process, and an internship with a lawyer that did corporate bankruptcy. And I got out of school, and that's the only thing I had any meaningful experience in. And at the time I got out of school, I had one job offer, so it didn't take a lot of time to figure out what to do with one job offer. And so that's kind of the direction life took me. I can't claim it was a passion from my youth or that kind of thing. It was more what presented itself through the course of life.
Oh, I guess sometimes they say, 80% of life is showing up. And so sometimes things just show up for you, huh?
It's kind of like that, yeah. Yeah, I wish it was a romantic story that my grandfather's grandfather was a lawyer and I always knew, but it's nothing like that.
All right. So, how long have you been practicing bankruptcy?
Oh boy, you make me feel old now. It's rounding up on 30 years. Seriously. Um, yeah,
Okay. So you've been through probably at least 3 recessions or economic downturns, kind of around those times.
I have. Yeah, yeah. I've seen a lot of things happen.
And what we're in right now, is it? What similarities do you see, and then what kind of differences do you see from past economic downturns that affect bankruptcy filings?
Oh, the biggest bellwether, in my view, for bankruptcy is real estate values. If people have real estate and have some equity in their homes, it gives them a lot of latitude to do home equity lines of credit or to sell the house or to do a lot of different things if they get in trouble. If real estate values take a nosedive, it's going to close all those doors to people. And additionally, it turns off a lot of work for real estate professionals. If people are upside down, they're not very excited about selling. For contractors, if people can't pull money out of their house, there's a lot fewer jobs for kitchens and bathroom remodels and things like that. So real estate prices have a lot to do with bankruptcy and the number of bankruptcies. Now, Not everybody that does a bankruptcy owns a house. Not everybody owns a house, period. But that's going to be a huge factor.
It's interesting you mentioned that because as price, demand is, well, interest rates just went up yesterday, but even prior before that, demand was through the roof, not enough inventory. Usually houses are getting 100,000, sometimes even $200,000 over asking. So it seems, just kind of based on you said, maybe this particular recession is a little bit different because it seems like housing prices are staying steady, or even rising.
I think right now they're just starting to turn, and that's tied directly to interest rates. If you've got a person that could pay 2,000 a month, um, they might be able to buy a $600,000 house if the interest rate is 3, and a $400,000 house if the interest rate is 6. So that's changing right now with
Yeah.
interest rates, but I think the interest rates are a leading indicator, and the real estate sales and real estate values will follow closely behind that.
All right. So, can you briefly walk us through, because I know business and personal bankruptcy is a little bit different, and so can you just tell us briefly a little the differences between personal, because I know there's chapter 7s and chapter 13s, and business have kind of the analogous one. Can you just explain a little bit between the business and the personal ones?
Yeah, the first thing to look at is the form of the business. Is
Hmm.
it a sole proprietorship, an LLC, or a corporation? LLCs and corporations are separate legal entities, and they have their own rights and options. A sole proprietorship is one and the same with the owner, and that means a business bankruptcy is automatically personal with a sole proprietorship. There's no distinction there.
Mhm.
With a different business entity, there can be a distinction where the business itself, the corporation or the LLC, conceivably could do a bankruptcy.
And usually with personal bankruptcy, you can generally wipe out all the debts, obviously with some exceptions. Is that the say true? Does that hold true for business bankruptcies, or is it typically reorganization of debts?
Um, the rules with a business bankruptcy are different. There's two big picture options, or maybe three. Well, why don't we talk about three? The first one with an entity, whether it's a corporation or an LLC, is oftentimes they're dissolved. Now, dissolution of an entity is akin to the death of a human. It just goes away. There is no mailbox, there is no phone number, there is no bank account, there's no one to serve, there's no one to talk to. It's gone. And oftentimes a person dissolves an entity without doing a bankruptcy. So, one big picture option with an entity would be dissolution. Within the realm of bankruptcy, an entity could do a Chapter 7, which is called liquidation. That's where the business says, the business, I'm going to turn over control of everything to the court system, auction off anything that's worth auctioning off and not nailed down, return any property that's leased to the lessor, return secured merchandise to the lender that's holding the collateral, and walk away. That can happen sometimes. The most common type of business bankruptcy would be a reorganization, and that's generally Chapter 11. That's a custom approach where, excuse me, it's a custom approach where the business puts together a plan of reorganization proposing to pay something more than nothing and asking for some cooperation from creditors. That can be ramrodded by the bankruptcy system. That is, a judge can approve that, so it's not completely dependent upon creditors to agree. And a single stubborn creditor not agreeing wouldn't stop that from going into play. So it gives the business some leverage to get people to cooperate, but it's a reorganization. And by the way, that does not require that things be paid in full. The reorganization can do all kinds of things, including pay pennies on the dollar, or turn over partial control of the business to creditors.
So it sounds like reorganization is if you want to stay in business. The other two is like I'm getting it out, and that's kind of the two factors.
Correct. Reorganization is about continuing to operate the
Hmm.
business, taking the position that the business is the golden goose. If we
Hmm.
kill the golden goose, there won't be any gold at all.
Hmm.
But it would be about continuing, and it would be for entities as opposed to individuals.
Yeah.
Now, go ahead.
I was going to ask how, we know with personal bankruptcy, obviously takes a credit hit. Can you share a little bit about how the credit scores dropping work on the business side and what effect this has with vendors and credit relationships?
Yeah, typically by the time that a business goes into a reorganization, the business credit, if it had any, is shot. A lot of the time, these are not businesses that have been around for 10 or 20 years, so they didn't have much in the form of business credit anyway. Relations with key vendors are really important.
Hmm.
And the law allows for special treatment for critical vendors and things of that nature. What is or is not a critical vendor is something that we talk to the business owner about and try to be as realistic as we can about that relationship, about what is or is not owed. If, for example, you're in the telemarketing industry, you may need to think through your vendor for phone services. Now, there may be other vendors, but trying to change vendors when you're out of money and everybody's angry is not going to be easy.
Hmm.
So, does that answer that?
Yeah, yeah, no, that's very, because I think, it's hard. Obviously, it'll be hard if you have bad credit, and a lot of businesses require or rely on relationship with vendors to provide them with supplies and things like that, so they can service their customers.
Yeah. Usually, by the time they're talking to me about a business reorganization, they're COD with an awful lot of important vendors where there's some back due
Hmm.
money, and the vendor said, hey, you need to deal with the back due money, but going forward, it's cash on the barrel header. We're not going to
Hmm.
deliver. So that's
Right.
typically what I see is people are at that point by the time they're talking to me.
Yeah. Now, is 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 filing for bankruptcy as a business kind of as bad as the normal person thinks? As Because I think most people kind of heard of it on the business, on the personal side. So it's like, oh yeah, I got to wipe off my debts, but my credit shot and I can't recover maybe for 7 years. Does it work a little bit different on the business side?
It does work a little bit different.
Mm.
The unfortunate thing that happens in the vast majority of the cases is there are personal guarantees,
Mm.
which drag the business problems into the personal realm. And if you'd like, I can talk a little bit more about that, but almost always it has a huge personal dynamic.
And actually, thank you for mentioning that, because I know for a lot of business owners, if they've got to lease a retail store or a warehouse, even though the company is a corporation or LLC, the landlord will require a personal guarantee by the owner. And so I would imagine if the owner can't personally satisfy, usually it can't, right? The business is going under. Most likely, the owner has its own analogous problems. Then you might have to file personal bankruptcy to extinguish the personal guarantees. Does that sound right?
That's exactly right. That's typically where the rubber meets the road is
Mm-hmm.
I talk to people about initially they want to do a business bankruptcy and not have it affect them personally, and they were told that's why they formed a corporation. It has a liability screen. It was going to protect them if things went bad, but that's undermined completely by the notion of a personal guarantee, which, as you had mentioned, landlords typically insist on, and sometimes vendors do as well. And what that would mean is they'd be in a place to say, well, if the business wants to reorganize and it wants to pay 10 cents on the dollar, that may be well and good. But we have two people on the hook. There's the business and then there's the individual. And the individual could be held responsible for anything the business didn't actually pay, which undermines the idea that the business is going to pay pennies on the dollar, particularly in a closely held corporation, a small business.
Um, Now, I don't practice litigation, but as business attorney or as attorneys, we know the concept of piercing the corporate veil. Um, does that idea ever come into bankruptcy where the the owner's trying to, I guess, hide behind and avoid the paying the debts personally, uh, or I mean the creditors will say, hey, this is a personal debt, or you have not um, maintained the corporate formality, so you can't hide behind the business bankruptcy, but we're going to go after you personally. Does that ever arise?
Almost never.
Hmm.
And I know exactly the doctrine you're thinking about,
Hmm.
and you and I probably both realize that with a lot of small corporations and LLCs, the owners don't necessarily maintain the corporate formalities. They form a corporation, they're given a binder, they stick it on the shelf, and no one asks for follow up. There's no mandatory government follow up on things, and it can just sit there for a long time and wind up being something could be easily pierced. But in life, I haven't seen that happen regularly. Typically, the biggest creditors would have insisted on personal guarantees and wouldn't need to go to that extent.
Yeah. I want to shift gears just a little bit and ask more on the personal side, especially with licensed professionals. I remember filling out applications for my particular license, and they'll ask me, "Have you ever filed for bankruptcy?" Um, and do you ever consult professionally licensed persons and how filing for bankruptcy could affect their licensure?
To a limited extent,
Mm.
um, I can tell you that as a general proposition, licensing is about protecting the public and it's about honesty. To
Mm.
be a licensed professional, you don't have to be perfect, but you do need to be honest about some of these things. The bankruptcy laws do offer protection from discrimination based upon the filing of a bankruptcy in a number of arenas, governmental employment, and a lot of licensing and credentialing programs offer some protection to people based on the filing of a bankruptcy. It's a lesser head form of discrimination, but
Mm.
there's a lot of protection there. So people shouldn't assume, but they usually do. If I do a bankruptcy, it means I can't work in this field, that field, or some other field. And they have wide ideas about how what they will or won't be able to do in the future. They're just incorrect in almost every circumstance.
Yeah. Um, kind of along those lines, we were talking about real estate, and since you've been doing this 30 years, you know what happened in 2008, 2009, and I saw fake, and you probably saw this too, fake bankruptcies, um, cloudy on title, things of that nature to delay or try to postpone the trustee's sale. Do you see those things coming back if if real estate crashes again?
I do. Um, yeah, they say LA is the fraud capital of the country, and I've seen more of those kinds of things, fake documents coming from Southern California, but those things pop up when the economy goes bad. There's going to be scams like that pop up that are propped up by fraudulent ideas of one sort or another, and there's kind of your handful of common ones, and you hit on a few of them right there,
Mhm.
uh, where it's something that looks like it's a bankruptcy, but it was created on a word processor or a PDF that got altered or something like that. And you see
Mhm.
that with deeds and with a lot of different paperwork. So I do think that's going to return.
Yeah. And if you can share maybe the number one myth or misconception about bankruptcy that most people get wrong.
Oh, this is going to surprise you, but most people think the credit ramifications are far worse than they actually are. So if I can just break this down, the place to start would be to say good credit is a history of paying bills on time. Bad credit is a history of not paying bills on time. Good credit is being able to say, I pay all my bills and I could afford one more. And bad credit is either being maxed out or unable to pay current obligations. A bankruptcy can forgive things and put a person from $30,000 behind the eight ball to a place where they can breathe and say, I can make my monthly obligations. I can start to rebuild. So that's part of it, but there's quite a bit more that goes with that. With any kind of credit, what the law says, and of course you know this, is that a bank can loan money whenever they're good and ready.
Hmm.
You never have a right to a loan. It's always submit an application and see what they say. But banks have underwriting guidelines. And so what they're going to say is not a mystery. They make it pretty clear what it takes to get approved. In life, people can have kind of B plus, A minus credit about 2 years after a bankruptcy. No joke. What I
Wow, that's pretty
encourage,
quick.
what I encourage people to
Hmm.
do is to talk with someone that has actually done a bankruptcy. The myths and the scare talk are pervasive, just as you'd said. And if they talk to people that haven't done a bankruptcy, it's strange how people will say with deep conviction what they know when they don't actually know it. How sure they are about what's going to happen if you do a bankruptcy when they haven't dealt with it. It's like an urban legend where they are dead set that this is how it is and they don't need to experience it to know. It's just not that way. So I encourage people, if they are skeptical of what I'm saying, try to talk to somebody who's done a bankruptcy and let them tell you what their experience was.
Hmm. And then, kind of along those lines, when is the best time for either a business or person to come talk to a bankruptcy attorney like you?
Well, certainly if you end up getting sued by a creditor, and by that I mean a vendor you weren't able to satisfy or a credit card that you've been juggling and trying to stay ahead of, that's going to be a time when you need to really take things seriously, that you won't be able to keep juggling the balls much longer. So I'd say if you end up sued, that's going to be a litmus test when you need to talk to a bankruptcy lawyer. If you have real estate that's going into foreclosure, you need to talk to a bankruptcy lawyer. But I don't discourage people from hard work and rolling up your sleeves and battling back and working through things. That's the American way. So bankruptcy should be kind of a trump card in your back pocket, a last resort if you need it. And I don't mind talking to people before they're right at the end of the rope, but it's not the first thing that I recommend, and I don't think anybody would.
All right, we've got here Mike Primus, bankruptcy attorney out in Northern California. So I'm actually looking on your website now, and you have 3 money back guarantees, which is not common in people in our industry. Can you share a little bit about the 3 money back guarantees you give for your clients?
Yeah, with the money back guarantees, I tried to address things that really scare people. And one of them is, what if I pay this money, put together these papers, and the judge says no? That's literally the words they say, is then the judge says no. Well, in bankruptcy, particularly with personal bankruptcy, the burden of proof is on us to document that you're in a financial hardship. Most people that think they're in a financial hardship are right. It's a rare person that's rich and didn't know it, but one of the money back guarantees is if we file your bankruptcy and it's rejected by the court, you get your money back. That almost never happens. There would have to be a circumstance where someone was found to have a lot of money that was not disclosed. That's one of them. Another guarantee that's a big one is we answer the phones. Everybody hates robots. Everybody hates going to a phone tree and wondering, am I ever going to talk to a human, or is this a phone tree that is going to send me in circles no matter what I do? So we try and answer the phones. Does that make sense?
Of course, I've gotten phone trees, and I've hung up on the business because I didn't want to deal with the phone tree.
Okay. Let's see. Any other questions for me right now, or I can tell you more about bankruptcy and
Yeah, I think probably, like, what are the most when we talk about the number one myth, but maybe the most top 3 questions you get about business bankruptcy?
oftentimes people assume I'm going to have to give up everything I have as part of any kind of bankruptcy. Whether it's business or whether it's personal, I'm going to have to give up the shirt off my back, the keys to my car. If I have to do a bankruptcy, my kids will be in the gutter. And I just know good and well that that's how it's going to be. Okay, that's not true. In the realm of business bankruptcy, particularly for the sole proprietor, you're allowed to keep things that the system considers necessities of life. Most businesses that I see are sole proprietorships, and there's protections for tools of the trade. There are ways to reorganize a sole proprietorship. It's a lot easier, faster, and cheaper than organizing reorganization for an entity that allows people to go forward with their livelihoods, whether that's DoorDash or as a contractor that, sprained their ankle and was out of work for a while. There's a lot of ways to work through it, but you don't lose everything you have. Society is not trying to cripple you or punish you. We're trying to keep people in the game to let people get past huge problems and move on with their lives. We don't want people to feel like the only thing they can do is rob a bank or jump off a bridge. There's a better way to deal with things.
All right, we got Mike Primus, bankruptcy attorney out in Northern California. We're going to get here to the end here. And of course, Mike is an entrepreneur. So I'm going to ask him some entrepreneur rapid fire questions. So just answer the first thing that pops in your head.
Let's go.
All right. Who do you look up to?
I have two favorites, Dave Ramsey and Dan Kennedy.
I've been actually on a Dan Kennedy binge lately. I remember about a year ago, like he was in hospice. I got those reports, and I got a newsletter that said today, and obviously he's been alive. So it's kind of almost a 180. He's like, oh, what happened? I thought he was supposed to be dead, but he's out and still speaking. So I'm glad, he's still with us. What's the best business advice you've ever received?
I think the best business advice I've ever received is to listen to your incoming and outgoing calls, because you'll be shocked at what the people that are working for you don't think, what you are sure they knew or know, and what they don't actually know.
What's the best business book you've ever read?
Oh, well, I mentioned I like Dave Ramsey's Entree Leadership is probably my favorite. I also like Dan Kennedy's No BS, Ruthless Management of People.
Oh,
I think it's
all
called
right.
Ruthless Management of People. Those are kind of my two favorites. I've read an awful lot of business books, but those are the ones that I resonate with.
All right. If you could do one thing over again, what would it be?
Well, I always tell people that one mistake I made in life was leaving San Diego. I went to school in San Diego, and I got out of school and I had one job and offer in Northern California, but one mistake I made was leaving San Diego, so that's what I'd say.
All right. What's the biggest challenge in your business today?
Staffing and staffing uncertainties. Try to be human about things, but it's hard because people have lives and they interfere with the day-to-day operations of things. And
Sure.
so that's the truth. Is if somebody's
Yeah.
out with COVID or something else, it's disruptive.
Yep. Yep. And lastly, you lose everything, but the only thing you have is a cell phone, a computer, and the internet. How do you rebuild your business in 30 days?
Oh my gosh, you said rapid fire. Oh boy. Um, the truth is, COVID taught us an awful lot, and I can do quite a bit of what I do with those three things. It would scare the pants off of me to try it, but I think those would be the tools of the trade that I'd really have to have. Um, so I think that's what I think I'd say.
All
is
right. Thanks again, Mike. Hey, if one of our listeners wanted to reach out to you and ask for your help, what's the best way to get in contact with you?
Call my office. I'd said it was one of the guarantees. We answer the phones. It's 510-741-1800.
All right, and I'll make sure I'll put that in the show notes. Hey, Mike, thanks again so much for your time, and hopefully we'll be talking soon.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me on, Dan.
All right.